You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's episode, which is another listener suggestion. Guys, we love getting suggestions from you on stories that you want to hear told here on the Hazard Ground, so please keep them coming. Producer@hazardground.com is the place to send your suggestions. Before we get to the show, though, bunch of reminders. We are so close to the Christmas holiday, so close to the end of the year. If you have any holiday shopping left to do, please go to our website, hazardground.com, and click on the Amazon button. If that's how you're going to do your shopping on Amazon, if you go to our website first, whatever you spend on Amazon, we will get a portion of, and we will donate a portion of that back to some of the charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground, so you could help out veterans from the comfort of your own living room, doing your holiday shopping just by going to hazardground.com first. Make sure you guys continue to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel subscribers are growing. It's another great platform for you guys to get the Hazard Ground, so please make sure you subscribe as well. Leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Remember, this doesn't have to be a long review. Any sort of review helps us continue to grow the podcast with Apple. We want to crack the top 100, and we're close to getting there. You guys have really stepped it up with the reviews, so please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Big thumbs up. We certainly appreciate it. And one final note before we get the episode underway. This is our final podcast of 2020, as we will take the following week off between Christmas and New Year's and give ourselves a well-deserved break. It's been an incredibly trying year for so many people, even me. I lost my civilian job in 2020, and I'm still trying to get back on my feet. And I don't say that for pity or for, help or anything, but it's just, I know so many people are struggling. Thank God this year is over. Let's turn the page to 2021, and let's continue to stick together, especially all of us here in the veterans and military community. We are the type of people who are going to lead us through these tough times into better times. So let's all stick together. Let's all help each other out, and let's hopefully have a much better 2021 ahead of us. I wish you all nothing but the best. Happy, healthy, safe holiday and New Year's, and we will talk to you again in 2021. But for now, here's this week's episode. Joining us this week on the Hazard Ground is a retired Army specialist who spent over 4.5 years in the U.S. Army with 2 deployments to Iraq. He is Justin Piessens, joining us on the Hazard Ground podcast. Justin, man, thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you very much for having me.
You were a listener suggestion. So one of our fans reached out to us and said that they wanted to tell your story, which we always appreciate because, we love our audience so much, but, they know so much about stories that we don't, because just from everyday casual, friends, family members, loved ones, whatever. And a listener reached out and wanted to hear your story. So we're happy to tell it for you and or help you tell it for that matter. And let's get started. How and why'd you get in the Army?
Quite frankly, lack of better options. I grew up in Chicago, and I didn't grow up in, a destitute situation or anything like that. But I was never really very good at school. I was never really very good at anything. And, my older brother had joined the service. He joined the Coast Guard. So he very loosely joined the military. I tease him about that all the time.
And I'm sure you never let him live it down, right?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I'll give him all the credit in the world. He was flying around in those helicopters through some pretty nasty storms and stuff, but I'll still bust his balls about the fact that he's a puddle pirate. And I saw how it had kind of made his life better. And, at 19 years old, I was really going nowhere else. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Let's give the Army thing a try. I actually called a Navy recruiter, an Army recruiter, and a Marine Corps recruiter, and the Army got back to me first. So that was why I chose the Army.
Yeah, I love the recruiting stories. It's amazing how we get so many people in the military. Like, it really is. Because if the Marine guy called you up, you would have had a totally different career.
I would have been a Marine, yeah.
Yeah, if the Navy guy called you up,
probably wouldn't join the Navy.
Yep,
yeah.
Exactly. So where were you on 9/11? Because you joined up after 9/11, right?
I did, yes. I joined up a little over a year after 9/11. I was actually laying in bed when the first plane hit the first tower. And my aunt, who lived in the upstairs apartment, had come downstairs and was just beating on the door saying, "Justin, wake up, we're under attack." And of course, I'm waking up, like, what the hell is she talking about? And go upstairs and, of course, see this building burning. And as I was standing there, the second plane hit. And it was just, I mean, I remember it very vividly. It was just so surreal that entire day. Growing up in Chicago, I lived not far from where a lot of the planes land in and out of O'Hare, which is one of the busiest airports in the world. And that night, it was kind of unsettling how quiet the skies were.
What were your thoughts and feelings on 9/11?
I really didn't know what to think. I knew that what had happened was incredibly bad and historic. And I don't know that I necessarily ever really felt like this, like burning patriotism before, or really, I mean, even after that. I'm, of course, an incredibly patriotic person. I don't mean for that to be taken the wrong way. But I remember feeling very uncertain, just with what does this mean for our world? You know, I mean, where do we go from here now?
But it had no effect on your decision to join. I mean, it was
no, it didn't. No. My decision to join was it was just something that I had come to naturally. I think that if 9/11 hadn't happened, that I probably would have ended up in the military anyways.
Why do you say that?
Well, just because, my decision was just based on my kind of lack of options and going nowhere at 19 years old.
I mean, I guess what I mean by that, you mentioned that before, but I guess, knowing that we're going to war, I mean, war doesn't look like an option to anybody.
Yeah, no, actually, I had a lot of people trying to talk me out of it, but I'll be honest with you. I don't know if it's just the fact that I'm a little bit of a slow learner, but I never expected to be sent to war. Like, I mean, I realize how dumb that sounds, like joining the army during a time of war, but it never really occurred to me that that would be something that I did. And literally 6 months after I joined the army, I was in Iraq, and I had never even been up close to a farm animal before. I mean, I was a city kid, and now there's these goats and shit walking around. I'm like, this is wild, man. What the hell did I do?
Yeah, it's funny. We do a lot of Vietnam guys, and none of them ever said, I never expected to go to war. No, they all knew that they were going. So
yeah,
kind of shell-shocked, to say the least.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that I didn't expect it. I just didn't really consider it very carefully.
But even the people who were trying to talk you out of it, they weren't like, dude, you're going to go to war. Like, what do you think?
Oh, yeah, they were. Yeah, they were. There were people that were like, this is what are you doing? This is stupid. You're going to have to go to war. And I'm just like, I don't know. Whatever happens, happens. I guess I just never really considered that would be a very real thing that would happen to me.
All right, so you get sent to basic where?
Fort Knox.
Did you know what you wanted to do at that point in the military?
No, actually, I didn't. I originally signed up to be a 19 Delta, which is a Cav Scout, but they didn't have Cav Scouts leaving for 6 more months, and I didn't feel like waiting, so I went back and renegotiated, and the recruiter's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, I just kind of want to blow shit up, I guess. Like, oh, you're going to love being a tanker. I'm like, all right, sign me up. So there's kind of a theme here, and that is I just sort of hurdle through life, and whatever comes at me, I just sort of handle as it comes up. And so, yeah, I became a tanker, not because I necessarily wanted to do that going in. Again, I was going to be a 19 Delta, and then they didn't have guys leaving for 6 months. And I'm like, okay, cool. I guess I could do the tank thing.
Well, what was it about a Cav Scout that interested you?
I don't know. I think just the brochure looked really badass, and I'm like, oh, that'd be cool,
Well, listen, I remember when we were doing ROTC, you go to advanced camp, they have the branch day, and every branch is represented there. And of course, the crowd around the armor guys was the biggest, right? Because there's an M1 sitting out there, and all the toys look like they're fun to play with. And as you said, it's blowing shit up,
absolutely.
It kind of just gets all your male, testosterone flowing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad I did. I mean, I loved. I mean, every minute of being a tanker was just awesome. I mean, basic training, Fort Knox in July is really shitty. I'll be honest with you, it's really warm and just.
I would argue that Fort Knox probably 11 months out of the year is pretty shitty, but
Yeah, no, that's
an argument
very accurate. That's an accurate statement.
I can think of only 2 Army posts that aren't shitty. One's Fort Lewis, the other one is Fort Carson. After that, the rest of them all pretty much have a shit component to it.
Oh yeah, I've heard the same. I've had a lot of buddies in and out of Fort Carson, and they all say it's awesome there. They love it, and I think that probably just has a lot to do with the fact that Colorado Springs is a beautiful town.
Well, yeah, they're the only ones located they're the only bases located near a what you would qualify as a major city, right? I mean, the Army has a fantastic knack of putting their posts in the most desolate, barren non-livable areas across the country. Yeah. I mean, so it's and it's funny because, I was at Fort Hood for my active duty time, and, now I'm in Georgia and I'm, finishing out my time in the National Guard and everything. But I always thought like Fort Stewart sounded great. I'm like, dude, it's right down Savannah. It's right near the water. When you find out it's probably not really in Savannah, it's a good 35, 40 minutes away. But two, now that I train there all the time, I see why Fort Stewart sucks, because any summertime training in the humidity of Hinesville, Georgia, just blows. So anyway, we digress. All right, so you get through basic. You do all your AIT at Fort Knox. When you get to your unit, what are you told? Like, are you preparing in AIT, like thinking you're going to combat?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, when I going through OSET, because we do OSET as tankers, and so it was a 4-month, one station unit training or one stop unit training, however you want to refer to it. And the entire time I was training, we were training to fight the Soviets. I mean, we were doing like essentially force on force tactics. Like I didn't even know what MOUT was before I got to my unit. And my unit was based out of Schweinfurt, Germany. I got assigned to 177 Armor Battalion in Schweinfurt. It's 1st Infantry Division, 2nd Dagger Brigade. And when I got to my unit, all of these guys looked at me. I ended up going to my unit with 3 other guys that I graduated basic training with. And we were just like these fucking new guys that show up. They had been training and preparing to go to Iraq for like the last 8 months. And we show up and we don't know what MOUT is. We don't know what any of this stuff is that they've been doing. And, of course it's like, well, these fucking idiots are going to get themselves killed out there. And it wasn't long. I think I was at my unit for 3 days before someone's like, well, welcome to the Army. You ready to go to Iraq? And I'm like, oh shit. Like that's really a thing that's going to happen now. Okay. Well, I guess I'm on this ride now. But no, I was not prepared whatsoever. And they had 2 months at that point to get us kind of up to speed on everything they had spent the last 8 months training together and learning how to do.
When do you get to your first leadership? Like what year and month?
November 2003.
Okay.
It was late November 2003.
All right. So we still hadn't found Saddam yet. And we are right in the midst of, shock and awe was over at this point in time. But
yeah,
you get a sense of hearing Iraq for the first time. And did you have any sort of preconceived notions about what it was?
Not really, no. I just, obviously, whatever I would see on the news, I understood that it was not conventional warfare. I understood that it wouldn't be, kind of like that force on force. But, I didn't really go into it thinking much about what might happen to me or what I might experience there.
All right, so it's November 2003, and then you get to Iraq when for the first time?
Late February. We deployed early February to Kuwait. We were in Kuwait for a few weeks. So we'll say late February, early March, 2004.
When you get to Iraq for the first time, where are you going? What are you told about your mission? What are you doing?
So it was, we were told we would be doing a multitude of different things. When we left Kuwait, we flew into LSA Anaconda. We were there for a couple of weeks and then we moved kind of up the street. I don't recall what that fob was called, but it was like a little fob, like right up the street from Anaconda. We were only there for a short time and, we essentially were given these Humvees and these Humvees didn't have any kind of armor on them. We actually had to fill up sandbags. So our platoon was split in half for some reason in Kuwait. And we had some guys were going to be driving our trucks from Kuwait up to Iraq. And then some of us just got to take a plane up there. So when I first got to Iraq, the very first time that I went out in the sector was actually with the unit we were leaving, which was the 3rd ID. And it was me and like 8 other guys from my platoon. And, they woke us up one morning and they're like, all right, we're going on mission. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I've been here for like 8 hours, but all right, let's do this. And that was like my first kind of exposure into like where they were like, hey, we're told you guys are gonna be doing all this and we just drive around and patrol these areas. And it was actually, 30 minutes into this first patrol that I was doing that we actually found an IED. And I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, again, this is all very, like, this is happening in my mind at just like lightning fast speeds. And so we set up this traffic control point, and I think right then I got kind of a taste of like what was really going on and how serious of a situation I had found myself in. As we started pulling people out of their cars and like searching them and like looking for weapons at this traffic control point while like we're waiting for EOD. And it really, at that moment, became very real to me that like, this isn't a fucking game, man. This is real shit.
It's interesting, and for the civilians listening, the IEDs are a common term now, but you have to. In the beginning, the first year plus of Iraq, IEDs weren't really a thing, right? Because after the initial invasion was over, we were able to move fairly freely on the roads without any sort of issue, and then the enemy just starts developing these IEDs. I heard you say a moment ago that you were filling you were driving soft shell Humvees. They weren't up armored at this point in time,
right?
But you were filling them with sandbags.
Yeah. So, and there's actually, there's an article in Stars and Stripes somewhere with a quote from me in it. And that was when we were still in Kuwait. We were told to fill up sandbags and put them in the floorboards of the Humvee. And then we would take sandbags and lay them across the hood and strap them down with ratchet straps. And then
whose idea was this?
Oh, I don't know. I think it came down from brigade, if I'm not mistaken. So I think the brigade commander was like, okay, take all of these soft shell Humvees and just like strap sandbags to them. That should do the trick.
Yeah. Speed and surprise out the window, by the way, when you got a couple extra tons of sand in your vehicle.
Sand driving around. Absolutely. And some of the Humvees, actually, we did have, it was like 1/4 inch thick steel plates that we had just bolted to the side of it. I specifically remember doing patrols with an M249 literally just sitting on the top of like a soft top Humvee, and I was sitting on like an MRE box, and I was the gunner. Like, that was me.
It's interesting. I mean, I actually did that similar thing on a mission once, but it was in the back of an up-armored Humvee that had an open back, but it was completely different. And so the purpose of these sandbags, I guess, was just to, absorb the explosion and deflect shrapnel?
Deflect shrapnel, I would imagine. I think that my quote in the Stars and Stripes, and I should have had this pulled up to reference, but it was, obviously, it's Kuwait, it's the desert, it's hot, it sucks, and some dude walks up and asks me about, like, oh, where are you from? And, what do you think about these sandbags? And I believe that the quote that the Stars and Stripes put in, they had to remove some expletives from. So I told the guy, like, yeah, if it stops a piece of shrapnel from going into my fucking jugular, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense at that point in time. Were you ever in a vehicle where you had to test the sandbag theory?
No, fortunately not, because I have very little faith in the fact that those sandbags would have done anything to offer any amount of protection.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I kind of scoff at the evolution of IEDs got grander and grander as the whole thing went on. Maybe in the very beginning it might have, but when you get towards, now I was there 05 to 06 the first time, and this is when IEDs started just, a lot of it was for effect. It's you take something that explodes, but you put 8 5-gallon gas cans in there just to make a big ball of smoke, because that sells really well to terrorists on the internet.
Absolutely, yeah. It's harassment and intimidation.
Yeah, exactly. But in the beginning, I wouldn't want to test it, but I don't know if depending on the size of it, it might work. But again, thankfully you didn't have to find out.
Yeah, something I guess would be better than nothing. But yeah, looking back on it, it is kind of, you think, you're like, wow, that's kind of how. But I guess it also goes to show how quickly the war in Iraq was developing and how quickly it was changing. Is that, we went from these soft-sided Humvees to, oh crap, we need armor like right now, and we're just haphazardly throwing whatever we can together.
So you're there for 8 hours on ground. You're already going out the door.
Yeah. I mean, we were there for we had barely just gotten our bags down, and we're just getting blown out on this mission with these guys we had never met. I mean, they just came by like our little hoosh that we were staying at that we just dropped our gear at, and we're like, all right, time to go on a mission. We're like, oh fuck, all right, cool, let's go.
What was the op tempo like from there going forward?
It was incredibly high. I mean, we were just day and night. There was never those first 2 months that I was in Iraq where I was on doing the Humvee patrols. It was incredibly fast paced. I mean, we were just constantly on mission. We were constantly out on patrol. We were constantly doing something, never sleeping. I mean, it was tough. I mean, it was grueling. 37-year-old Justin would not be able to keep up with 20-year-old Justin back then at all.
So you signed up to be a tanker, and you're sitting here running around in these soft-skin Humvees. Are you ever being like, what the hell am I doing? I'm supposed to be in a tank. Like, were you ever like asking that question of anybody?
Yeah, and eventually, a few months in, we would get our wish, and we actually got our tanks after, God, I want to say it was probably about 3 months in country, maybe a little less, 2.5, 3 months. We'll call it 3 months just for the sake of argument. We were FedExed our tanks, and we from that point had become the brigade QRF. So, I mean, eventually we did get onto the tanks, which was really cool. And that's like a whole other, it's almost like my first deployment was like 2 separate deployments in one, because while we were on the Humvees, I got to experience all of that, and what that was like, sort of doing like those types of patrols, which again, I mean, we were just constantly on the move. We did get into some scraps, with guys in the area while we were on the Humvees. And so it definitely, God, I remember my first time it happened when we had been ambushed, and it was at night. And I remember just standing in the middle of the road with my nods on, just watching this whole fucking spectacular light show unfold. And I didn't do anything. I wasn't scared. I wasn't like, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, like all the noise and all the commotion, and you're looking at this through your night vision. It's like, whoa, this is fucking incredible. And I remember it was my truck commander or my platoon sergeant. They were both big, giant, great gorilla human beings, grabbed me by my K-pot and dragged me behind the truck and was like, Piessens, what the fuck are you doing? I was just watching, I guess. I was spectating. Like, I have no idea at this point. This is all new to me. So I took the opportunity from there forward to shoot back when things would happen. But that first time, it was just like, it was like an out-of-body experience. I wasn't actually there. I wasn't a participant. I was watching it.
Did you guys lose anybody on the first deployment?
Fortunately not.
Okay. And I ask because I just wonder how the evolution of things, because, we 04 to 05 and 05 to 06, violence starts to get to a different level.
It does, yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, as you sort of go through more iterations of these patrols and go through more iterations of what's going on, do you start to feel like you get a better sense of, what combat is like and how to handle it?
Absolutely. The first time is always, I guess everybody reacts differently. And, we had guys, that didn't handle it well. My second deployment, my platoon wasn't so fortunate. We got fucking chewed up and spit out, man. But, like even that first deployment, there were guys that they didn't handle combat well, and they had the taste of it. I know there was one guy in the HAC company. They had gotten ambushed on a patrol, and he literally just kept fucking driving. Like, he wouldn't stop and turn around to help the guys. I believe it was a first sergeant's driver, and he essentially ran away. And they had to first sergeant had to drag his ass out of the fucking truck and bring his ass back to the fight. And so some guys don't, and I guess not everyone's meant to handle it. That's okay, I guess,
No, it is. We say it a lot that it's one of those weird things. Some of the biggest, toughest guys you're ever around, the minute that first bullet flies, their brain kicks in. And it changes. It just changes their mentality. And everybody who puts on a uniform and has been in combat will have a certain feeling or opinion about that individual. But all things aside, and I think all things considered equal, in retrospect, you could look at it and go, I understand it. I get it. I wouldn't do it, but not everybody is cut from that cloth that they can handle that sort of intensity in that moment.
Right.
So when you started patrolling in tanks, did you feel more like emboldened? Did you feel more like...
Absolutely. I mean, it's like playing a video game with the cheat codes on, man. I mean, it was at that point, and especially that early on in Operation Iraqi Freedom, there wasn't a lot that could damage a tank. I mean, there wasn't a lot out there that could kill us, and we knew that, and we took advantage of that. We put that armor that we were around in incredibly hot situations multiple times, and we always came out on top because we knew we would. I mean, there's nothing that was breaking that tank that they could throw at us, and we knew that, and we used it to our advantage.
When you started doing mount patrols, and for the civilians, you talk about urban terrain. in a city environment. I mean, I learned very quickly, at least in my deployment, like I almost felt like tanks were useless because of what was, I mean, sure, they were great cover and it was great to have the firepower there. But in reality, when it came to finding bad guys inside a city environment, there's not much a tank can do, right? I mean, you're kind of just a big static object.
Yeah, and you're right. So the area that we got sent with our tanks where we had, I guess, the most action, where we had the most encounters, we were at a FOB called FOB Summerall outside of the town of Beji. And we were at that point supporting Unit 17 Field Artillery. And of course, now you have these field artillery guys that are redlegs, you know, they want to shoot these big ass cannons at people from miles away, but they're doing mountain patrols and Humvees. And so our tanks had been sent there. There was a lot of nasty shit going on in Beji around that time. So we had been sent there to help out. And that's where we found the most action. And we would take our tanks and we would literally drive like trackpad to trackpad speed down these alleys, popping flares off the top of our tanks, letting them know where we were at. Like we wanted them to come fuck with us. We had in our grenade launchers, instead of smoke, we had phosphorus grenades loaded. And so we would actually, at one point, some unfortunate soul had decided to try and shoot at us from some cover, the way he thought it was cover, and we just put the turret over the side and fucking dropped a whole shitload of phosphorus on him, drove off. And so, like, as far as like the tank's usefulness in urban areas, I agree and disagree with the fact that they are useful, and I think having that armor there definitely changed the landscape of the activities in that area. We denied a lot of movement from those guys just by having such a massive presence there. And it would have been November of 2004.
It's interesting because it was, my deployment, I got by the time 2006 rolled around, rules of engagement were, hey, don't do that. Like we had done it enough. By the time you had finished your deployment, everybody had done it enough to the point where hearts and minds were starting to go in the other direction.
Right. Well, and that actually, when we first got to Beji, we were under a pretty tight, we were on a pretty short leash, I guess you could say. And 17 Field Artillery had just started taking too many casualties. We as a platoon called it the Battle of Beji, but one day we were out there for probably 9 hours fighting these guys, and we rolled back to the FOB. We had 3 tanks out there, and we rolled back to the FOB with no coax ammo on any tank, no main gun rounds on any tank, no 50 cal ammo on any tank. We had rifle and pistol ammo only when we got back to the FOB.
Wow.
I mean, it was insane. I mean, I look at the videos. I mean, I have a video somewhere of my tank commander fucking chucking hand grenades out of the fucking TC hatch. I mean, it was just like craziness. It was certainly quite the experience, for better, for worse.
You had mentioned that you got into some really heavy stuff later on that day or another day. What was that about?
Oh yes, a couple times. Yeah. So we had, it was actually a little bit prior to that sort of big Battle of Beji that I believe was like November 14th, 2004. Yeah, it would have been November, right before we were getting ready to head back. But that month of October and November were particularly bad in Beji. I know that 17 had started taking casualties. And again, these guys were still, lightly plated Humvees, lightly armored Humvees. And they were getting tore up out there, and they had a unit that had gotten pinned down on one of the bridges there. And we actually did lose a tank shortly before that. So we had one platoon from 177 Charlie Company. That was my platoon, Warpig platoon. And then we had 2 tanks from Bravo Company for some reason. No idea. They just kind of got attached to this 6-tank QRF task force, I guess, running around Beji. And one of the tanks from Bravo Company rolled over a triple stack anti-tank mine and fucking blew the track off the front of it and everything else. And so, I mean, we knew that things were heating up at that point, and it was about a week or so before that big Battle of Beji, mid-November, and 17 had a unit had gotten pinned down on this bridge, and we had gotten blown out there. We had 4 tanks out there, and it was at that point, that was the first time that we actually started using the main gun. And I know that we had found a car that maybe they didn't know that a tank could reach out where they were, but this car was using, they were using this car as like a transport to kind of pick guys up and move them like rooftop to rooftop. And our gunner saw a bunch of dudes with AKs get into this car, and he was moving them around. And as soon as that car came back around the corner after picking up another load of dudes, he just waylaid this fucking thing with the main gun. And that was like the first time I remember just feeling like so nervous. Like, what if the gun doesn't go off? Like, what if something goes wrong? But no, he found his target. And that was like the first kind of exposure, if you will, to, I guess using our tanks in actual combat.
How does that deployment end for you?
So that deployment ends for me pretty quietly, actually. After like November, again, after like that big battle in Beiji, things got really, really, really quiet in that town. And it ended rather quietly. I mean, we started doing we were like guarding bridges, we were guarding infrastructure, things like that. And shortly before we left, I do remember one thing that was kind of wild. And that was that, like, before we left, the MPs had to like come search all of our stuff and make sure like we weren't smuggling. And I remember kind of feeling like a criminal, like all of this shit I've just been through in like the last 12 months. And like, now you're going to come and like shake me down and like, dump your bag out, go through all of your stuff, like search you. And it's like, man, dude, I just want to fucking go home, dude. Like, I don't want to bring nothing with me. So yeah, I mean, after that, it ended pretty quietly. Went back to Germany, and essentially was reassigned to the S3 shop in HHC, which became the PSD, Protective Services Detachment, which I had gotten assigned to just a few months after getting back.
You're back now. Do you think like your Army career is coming to an end? Did you want to do 4 years? Did you know what was next? I mean, because a lot of times deployments, sort of reinvigorate people to stay in.
No, it definitely didn't for me. I was ready to do my 3 and just kind of say, hey, look, I did this. It was a thing I did. But of course, Stop Loss had different plans for me. We talked about that a little bit when we first started the call. When I got back to Germany, they kind of rearranged the entire battalion. When we deployed, we were all in our little task forces, and, you had guys from, infantry battalions, guys from armor and scout battalions, everything else, all kind of in this one task force. And then you go back to your unit and you go back to garrison and you're back in your battalion, you're whole again. And so they kind of moved everyone in the battalion around, and I was ready just to like say, hey, look, man, at this point it would have been March 2005. And I'm like, okay, I've got like a year and some change and I'm out of here. And I was pretty content just to do that, just to kind of ride out this last year, have my fun. Being stationed in Germany is pretty freaking cool.
Mm-hmm.
I got to do a lot. I got to see a lot. It was a really, really neat place to be stationed. But yeah, no, a few days, as we had talked about 10 days or so before I was supposed to ETS or get out, we got stop lost. I got stop lost, and I had to redeploy, and that would have been OIF 0608.
So 10 days before you're supposed to leave the Army for good.
Yeah.
They tell you you're not going anywhere. Not only you're not going anywhere, you're going back to war.
Yeah, you got to deploy again.
What was that feeling like?
I remember being, I guess, irritated at best, but I kind of like, we kind of knew, so it wasn't like a complete surprise. Like, there had been a lot of whispers about it for, about a month or two prior to all of that happening. So it wasn't like, we all sort of knew, hey, this might happen. They even told me early June, like, hey, just don't plan on doing any out processing because it's like only a matter of time. Any day now, we're going to come down on orders. And sure enough, we did. I only know of one other guy that was stop lost longer than me, and that was by about 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he was supposed to get out about 3 days before me, and he felt like he came down on stop loss too.
So you're headed back to combat. What are they telling you? Where are you going?
Ramadi.
Even better.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember it would have been July or August, right before we're getting ready to go. And the brigade commander had come down to our motor pool and told us we were going to Ramadi. And he didn't mix words when he told us how bad it was there, that it was a meat grinder. And he was right. He was absolutely right about that.
And what month year was this?
This would have been July or August 2006 when he came to the motor pool, and we deployed, made it to Kuwait, September 2006.
That's interesting because for those who remember, it was, I think I want to say March or April of 2000. No.
Troop surge.
Well, no, I think it was 07, but I was in Ramadi, or was it Fallujah? But it was out that way where the contractors were hung off the bridge. The Marines got into some heavy stuff there. I mean, that was... It was one of the worst places in Iraq to be at. That and Sadr City were probably the two worst places to be in Iraq at that point in time.
Yeah, the other half of our battalion went to Sadr City.
Oh, gee. Well, you guys
they didn't.
Yeah, you guys drew the money card there, huh?
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, we got served up, and my direct unit, the PSD, we weren't obviously taking tanks with us this time.
So what was that feeling like?
I guess had sort of been through some of that before made me feel a little bit more comfortable. Mm-hmm. But also hearing from your brigade commander and knowing, I mean, obviously we knew going into it, like Ramadi's a bad place, man. Sadr City's a bad place. Like this is real shit. And yeah, it's a little disappointing, especially when I'm standing in the motor pool listening to my brigade commander say this. You can't help but think, well, I should have been out of here 8 weeks ago, man. I'm still here. I'm still in Germany, and I haven't even started my deployment yet. And that was a 15-month deployment.
Oh, man. Dear Lord.
Yeah, I know. They really served me up with one, didn't they? A green weenie.
All right. So, I mean, you have this experience of doing Humvee patrols before, so it's not exactly completely foreign to you. At least this time you're going with up armoreds?
Oh yeah. I mean, we had like the Frag 5 kits and the whole, like we had the works. I mean, we had what I understand to be essentially like the final evolution of the Humvee before they started going to like the MRAPs.
Yeah, well, I never did MRAPs. We did up armored Humvees the whole time.
Yeah,
but so when you get to Ramadi, what's the situation like on ground?
Bad. I mean, it was very intense. Like when we got there, I mean, like you could just tell when you got there that like there was just there was something in the air there. It was incredibly tense. It was, you just felt like, yeah, this is like real shit. Like I never felt that way during OIF2. I never felt that kind of like, just intensity of just being there. Like, yeah, like, this is real shit. We were, Task Force 177 was actually assigned to a Marine unit. We were assigned to the 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit out there in Ramadi. And so we weren't even like attached to an Army unit at that point. I mean, we were operating under the guidance of, our leadership was operating under the guidance of Marine Corps when we first got there.
What was that like?
Did you know that the Marines get beer on their birthday, even in theater?
Really?
Yes. And here's the thing, like we got to partake in that because we were attached to their thing. So yes, we actually got to like legit, drink beer while we were in Ramadi, real beer too. Now our task force leadership came up with this idea, foolproof plan to make sure the guys only have 2 beers. We're going to mark a black mark on the back of one hand for 1 beer and a black to complete the X for 2 beers. I guess they didn't plan on Joe washing the marks off. And yeah, several of us just got absolutely shithouse drunk that day.
Everybody should get hammered once in theater. It's just an experience you never forget.
We had people sending us like vodka and bottles and shit. Like, I mean, that's actually, we did quite a bit of both of my deployments. Very fortunate to have from platoon sergeant on down, OIF2, our platoon sergeant had an understanding with us. If a family member sends you a bottle, so long as you pay your homage, if you will, to them, they don't give a shit. Just be smart about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to go about it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I had less to worry about when it came to that. We were in a whole different world in the special ops community, but different story for a different day.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you're there on ground, and you had mentioned that, this was a much rougher deployment. Tell me how and why.
It was much more intense. It was much busier. My platoon, we were PSD, we were taking the battalion leadership around. We were also doing kind of like, I guess, odd jobs, you could call it. So there were a group of people, and I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I assume they were with, an intelligence agency somewhere. And they would go out and they would grab like high value targets. They would talk to people, things like that. And my platoon would be used essentially to present like I guess like big army source there. So like we would go somewhere and we would have our truck staged, and if shit had gone down, it was our job obviously to respond to it. Or even just to maybe look like we were patrolling the area. And if someone just disappears, I guess maybe they would think that the army guys took them. I don't know. We were never really told anything about specifically what was going on, other than, hey, we need your trucks here. We need you guys to be doing these things. And so I guess that kind of added to like that very tense, intense sort of like feeling like, hey, man, we're like doing real shit here.
What was the actual battle like? What was actual fighting like? I mean, as far as comparatively speaking.
Yeah, so it was obviously much different being on foot. The first time we really got into it there, aside from like, just some minor scraps, if you will, like kind of, react to ambush, shoot back, run away. Cause obviously if you have the battalion commander with you, you don't stay and fight. Your job at that point is to lay down as much hate as you possibly can as you move through the area and get your principal to safety. And so the first time we like really got into it, it was pretty intense. I mean, it was, we had an AT-4 in the trunk that we eventually ended up shooting at one person that was barricaded behind this wall. But it was much like that sort of first experience in OIF2, except it was much more urban. And so, a little more intimate, I guess, if you will, a lot more intimate as far as, being much closer and engaging targets that are in a much more confined space.
What was it like when you guys lost somebody?
That changes you. So January 30th, 2007, we took our first losses. Bravo section was on a patrol in the 5 kilo area, just across the river from Ramadi, and lead Humvee got hit with an IED, immediately killed the truck commander, Sergeant Altz, wounded and just absolutely gravely wounded, horribly wounded, both the driver and the gunner. The truck that was behind them, Sergeant Milton Gist dismounted to render aid, and as he was moving to render aid, a secondary device went off and killed him. So in a matter of just a few minutes, we had lost 2 guys and had 2 more that didn't look like they were going to make it. The 2 that were wounded, Specialist Evan Cole and Specialist Joel Wilkins, did end up surviving, thankfully. But that was, I mean,
where
it was 2 guys, I actually I wasn't there that day when that happened. I had been sent, I was an RR. And so I, remember getting an email from someone like, hey, man, like shit's just getting serious here. And, I had found out when I got back that, yeah, we had lost 2 guys and 2 more were not there. Get the replacement truck, and so there's obviously a feeling of, why wasn't I there? What could I have done?
Right.
Would it have made a difference? Truth be told, I was always the lead truck. I was always the one driving the lead truck, and the lead truck was the one that got hit that day. And so of course there's a certain amount of guilt that's associated with that is, well, that should have been my truck. Like I should have been the one leading that patrol, because that was me and Mike Ruoff. That was our thing. We were the lead truck. It was only a few months later we lost Mike Ruoff to small arms fire in an ambush. Our brigade during that deployment, the 2nd Dagger Brigade, and there's actually an article in the Stars and Stripes about it called Europe's Deadliest Deployment. We had taken more losses than any unit since the Vietnam War.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, I mean, when Colonel Dragon, which by the way, I think is a really cool fucking name, when Colonel Dragon said it is a meat grinder, he wasn't lying.
No, I mean, obviously not.
Yeah, no, it was bad. I can say that towards the end of that deployment, like the last 3 months, it started getting a much more quiet. My task force was a huge part in what was known as the Anbar Awakening. And the Anbar Awakening was essentially pro-U.S. militias that had decided to take a stand against anti-coalition forces. Truth be told, we paid better, and that's kind of what it came down to in the end. But that's no big surprise with how things operate over there. You know that. Whoever can pay the most wins. And so they figured that out eventually, that we pay better. And, they eventually got this Anbar Awakening group going, and it really did kind of turn the tide of the intensity level that was there. The last couple of weeks, I don't know, kind of felt like it was like a totally different deployment. It was like those last few 8 weeks or so was it was so different because things had it had started so intense, and it had built up to kind of this pinnacle, and then just started tapering off after that as far as the intensity of what was going on. And to where by the last mission, I think we were taking our Kevlars and vests off and shit when we would go places to some of these sheikhs' houses and stuff, and we just chill if we were just hanging out with the boys.
You talked about how it changes you. How are you different now, or how were you different then, even after the whole thing?
I after my first deployment, I went through a pretty rough bout with drinking. At one point, I was drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels every day. And that's obviously not a sustainable lifestyle. And it got a little worse after my second deployment. I self-medicated with everything from whatever drugs I could get my hands on to alcohol to whatever else. But I think I kind of knew, even then, okay, this is just something you're going to do and get out of your system. I remember even when I was still in, because at that point when I got back from Ramadi, I had 90 days left. I had to do 90 more days and they could finally let me go. I was in the clubs in Germany. I was eating ecstasy. I was taking LSD. I was doing whatever. I didn't give a shit. I was totally on whatever the fuck happens to me at this point happens to me. That tapered off a lot, obviously, when I got back to the States, and I did kind of realize that, Mike, who was very close with me, Mike Ruoff was actually in my platoon for OIF2. He was one of the tank commanders, and he was my truck commander in Ramadi, and losing him was probably the single most impactful event that has ever happened to me in my entire life. I think that a lot of what I do now and a lot of what drives me is wanting to make him proud. I don't know if that sounds weird.
No, not at all.
He's not here with us anymore, but just trying to live a life that I would think that if he could sit down with me right now, that he would say, man, Piessens, you did all right, man. I'm proud of what you've done. I actually became pretty close with his widow, and afterwards, when I left the Army, she actually moved to Sarasota, Florida. And I was I moved to Tampa, Florida after the Army. I'd never been to Tampa, mind you. And I just decided to move there with someone that I knew. So we became close, and, it's not easy. Wasn't easy that first time that, Tracy, and she's a very awesome person, very sweet soul. And, she wanted to see me. She said, Justin, why don't we go grab dinner, whatever, we can be family, we're connected through this. horrible event, and just, man, seeing his kids and everything, that's hard, man. I mean, that's tough. And, but watching that they've grown up to be really awesome people, despite losing their father at a very young age and everything, is a testament to how strong Tracy is.
Have you ever talked to his kids about what happened to his dad?
No, I couldn't.
Did they ask?
No. And
what did his widow ask you about it?
She did ask me. She asked me a lot of questions. She asked me, I remember one time she asked me, was Mike happy? And, so we would sit there sometimes, and Mike always talked about this man loved his family like nobody you've ever met. And he loved his wife. I mean, he would tell us, we'd all be sitting around, of course, Mike was a little older, obviously. He's a staff sergeant at the time. We were all younger guys. He was 10 years older than us. So he was a family man. He had obviously done all of that young man partying. So we'd be sitting around talking about, this and that, things that young guys do, all the loose women you meet at the clubs and such. And, Mike would tell us about how he met Tracy and, how he proposed to her and, all the things that he had been through. I told Tracy all of that, and I said, Tracy, he couldn't say enough good things about you and how, he loved his family. I mean, and that's, I think that probably did her some good to hear. I would like to think it did. Probably wasn't easy to hear, but she never asked me about what happened that day. And I don't think that she would. And I think that probably has as much to do with she doesn't want to hear as much as she doesn't want me to have to relive it.
It's interesting. I mean, everybody, some people want to know, some people don't. And I certainly understand your position about not wanting to tell. So, again, I thank you for sharing it with us here. In retrospect, all the self-medicating you did was foolish, or was it needed at the time? I mean, the fact that you were able to overcome it, obviously speaks a testament to you, but there's a certain amount of dealing with it in your own way, in your own time, that is important.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree 100%. I think that at that time and that place, especially, it's, and this is the one thing that I guess, I don't tend to complain a lot about my time in the military or things that happened to me in the Army. And I feel like I have every right to complain, having been stop lost for almost 2 years and being sent back to war and everything else. The one thing that kind of pisses me off is how, they took us from a place like Ramadi and put us back in the town of Schweinfurt, Germany. And it's like overnight. And how shocking is that to your system to just literally, hey, just go ahead and turn the switch off. You're cool, right? Just go ahead and turn the switch off. And so everything that had happened in kind of that 90 days that I was back in Germany, where things were really, bad with this self-medicating and everything else, I think that served its purpose for what it's worth. It was what kind of got me through that specific moment, and kind of in some strange way helped me reacclimate. Maybe creating that chaos in my life helped me, I guess, ease back into what is normal. I don't know. But I feel like it did, at that time in that place, it served its purpose.
Do you feel like if you had not lost some of your brothers and some of your teammates, that you would have stayed in the military, or you were done no matter what?
No, I think I was done. When I joined, and, even as that dumb kid way back when who didn't know what the hell he wanted to do and joined the Army because literally they called him back first. I always knew that it wasn't going to be a career for me, that there was something else I wanted to go do. I just didn't know what at that point. But no, I don't think I probably would have stayed. There are men much better suited to be leaders in the Army, and I'm not one of them.
When you think back on your time, what are your regrets?
I wish I would have traveled more when I was in Germany. I did travel a lot. I did travel quite a bit. But I wish I would have taken some of those weekends where I literally spent the entire weekend drinking and maybe just gone to one more place, right? Gone and seen one more thing. because when you're there, it's cheap, man. I mean, you go everywhere. It's so easy to go see all of these cool things. And no, I'm going to hang out with my buddies and, you know, just drink and tear shit up around the barracks and, you know, steal shit from the MPs and use their riot shields to joust in the hallways on chairs and shit. Like, that's much better than going and seeing some sort of like historic thing.
Listen, if it makes you feel any better, as a second and first lieutenant at Fort Hood, I did the same thing. I mean, we just sat around our house and drank and played video games all day long. You know, occasionally we went out and drank, but, you know, for the most part, we just sat around and drank. Yeah. We weren't really into the culture a bit at that point. You have to get a little bit more life experience to realize that stuff matters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. If I could go back and do it again, I'd probably pull 21, 22-year-old me aside and be like, hey, dumbass, don't like get shit house drunk every weekend. I don't know, like go see something next weekend. Don't drink all weekend.
Anything out? I mean, obviously the loss of life and the loss of your teammates, but anything keep you up at night as far as combat battles are concerned?
Sometimes. You know, it's weird, and I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, how much stress I'm under, just in general. That, you know, when I start experiencing very high stress situations, whether it's work or home life or whatever, I feel almost like my mental walls weaken a little bit, and sometimes things creep in, and sometimes, you know, sometimes I'll have dreams that catch me off guard, you know, where, you know, I open up my eyes and, you know, realize, holy shit, man, I was back there again all night. And, but, you know, I found that one of the things that the VA is really, really good at is medicating men and just medicate this person until there's nothing left. Just whittle them down and keep them medicated. And I'm not anti-medication. If it works for you, that's great. But what I've found is through diet and exercise, I can largely regulate my mental mindset, you know, by keeping my body physically healthy, that my mind stays healthier. And, you know, that those episodes are fewer and further between, you know, when my body runs at peak efficiency, so does my brain. And so does that kind of mental barrier that I can keep up and keep strong and keep those things at bay.
You get out. Did you know what you were going to do next?
No, I actually, so as I had mentioned earlier, I got out, I moved to Tampa, Florida, and I went to school to be a cop. And this was in 2008, and the housing bubble burst and recession hit like a month after I got out of the Army. And so I went to school to be a cop, started looking for jobs because I figured it would be like a normal transition, right? Like, be a police officer. Why not? You know, I was in the military, I guess go be a police officer. It seemed to make sense to me at the time. But when I finished school down there, after I finished this whole program, everything else, and, you know, I'm all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go start my career in law enforcement, I was told by every single agency, like, no, dude, you pretty much have to know somebody to get in here at this point because nobody was hiring. So I moved back up to Illinois, where I was originally from. My parents, my mom, my stepdad had since moved out to the suburbs. And so I moved out to the suburbs, stayed with them for a little while, started working, worked for about 6 months and decided, okay, time to figure out what we're going to do. And went to school to learn how to fix computers and got into IT. And it turns out, you know, for the reputation that tankers have of being largely mentally challenged, I wasn't, and was quite adept at this whole computer fixing thing. And that's pretty much what I've been doing ever since. I have 2 degrees in computer science and have been working in information technology for the last 7 years.
When did you get your 2 degrees? After you got out, obviously, right?
After I got out. Oh, you know what? Speaking of, the Army was not done with me after I got out. These assholes.
How so?
I'm like a year and a half out, right? Like, I mean, I'm like 6 months from finishing a degree, and, you know, I've been busting my ass. Here I am trying to just make a normal life, right? Like, I'm trying to live a normal life. I get a call, you know, to go to this Army Reserve unit in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and some slicker than shit used car salesman NCO pulls out this list and basically is like, do you know what that is? I'm like, yeah, it's my name. He's like, well, you got 2 choices. He's like, you're going to get recalled to active duty, or you can sign a stabilization contract with the reserves. And then I had to join an MP unit. And I'm like, dude, I'm not even like MOS qualified. So like, I'm this 19 kilo, spent 2 years in a fucking MP unit in Arlington Heights, like in the reserves.
Oh, really?
It was absolutely ridiculous. Yes, it was the most ridiculous. Like, it was such a freaking culture shock going to this reserve unit.
Yeah, well.
Because like, I mean, I was just like, I show up the first day. I'm like, okay, fuck, I guess it's time to do the army thing. I had to shave and everything. I mean, I had started growing a beard. I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, can you assholes just leave me alone? But no, I did that. It wasn't, honestly, it was dumb. It was silly. That's the best way I can describe it. It's just silly. I have no ill will towards any of those people in that unit. They were all wonderful young people. But you know, it was a completely different world, and I just sort of got suckered into boosting their numbers for a year and a half or 2 years.
Interesting. So you were done at that point in time.
Oh yeah, at that point they finally were like, all right, you know, we're finally done with your ass. And yes, because I still had some time with the inactive reserves when I had left active duty. And so, yeah, like a year and a half after I got out, they called me this muster and like pulled up my name on this long sheet of paper and were like, well, you got two choices: join the reserves or go back active. And I'm like, you son of a bitch, leave me alone already. But they have. And since they have left me alone and have not been bothering me anymore.
You talked about your transition on the way out and the things that you struggled with. What would you say to, you know, a young soldier, an E4 and E5 who's about to get out of the military? What's a piece of advice you would give them?
So, and I have given this advice before to people who have asked me. They might, you know, people who've had family members getting out and, you know, wanted to know what's next. And the biggest thing I could say is that, you know, you have to, don't look at getting out as like, hey, I'm going to get out and I'm going to take 6 months off. I'm going to get out and I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to do this. No, you're going to get out and you're going to resume. You're going to find a job. You're going to find a purpose. You have to find that purpose. Unfortunately, I think a lot of guys get out and they struggle finding that purpose. And I do believe that contributes to the high rates of veteran suicide. I believe that, you know, the inability to kind of find that purpose leads into things like being unable to integrate into society. I struggled with that myself. It was actually the listener that put me in touch with you, Steve. You know, he'd be the one to be able to tell you. I was kind of an asshole when I got out. I was a little bit of a jerk off. Like I kind of felt like, you know, anybody that hadn't seen combat wasn't worthy of my time. And letting go of that, letting go of who I was and of that kind of mentality really did help me a lot in kind of building relationships with other people and civilians, if you will, you know, in great relationships with people. You know, not to sit on my high horse and say, oh, you know, you weren't in the military, you weren't in combat, like we can't possibly be friends and this and that. No, letting go of that is really important, and allowing yourself to kind of, you know, I guess, make friends with those people and finding that purpose will go a really long way to those young men and women that are leaving the service and might be wondering what's next.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's different for everybody, right? And that's the hard part.
Absolutely.
You know, there's no cookie cutter solution, because if there was, we would have figured it out by now. You know, and to that end, I think that finding and filling that void, you know, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, so correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, that you didn't do what I did does two things. One, it still connects you to the military and keeps your identity as somebody who's in the military. And two,
absolutely, it
allows you not to feel empty, because if you didn't do anything in the military, then you don't have anything.
Right. And at that point, I mean, when you first get out, like it's your entire identity. I mean, that's everything you were over the last so many years was that. And when you get out, it's over. That's it. You're not that anymore. And that's why I think finding that purpose, and, you know, you're absolutely right when you say it's different from everyone. As a matter of fact, I often use the expression individual mileage will vary, you know, for everybody that has an experience in the military. Because it's so vastly different, you know, from, you know, what you did and what I did are going to be completely different from what a cook or a fueler does. I mean, it's just everything about it is going to be different. But one thing that does hold pretty true is that becomes a huge part of who you are and your identity. And so when you get out and that's gone all of a sudden, I think that a lot of people have a hard time handling that.
Anything you miss about the Army at all?
The camaraderie, really. I mean, I don't miss the fuckery. I don't miss the targeted details. I don't miss any of that. The camaraderie, you know, but then, you know, when you think about it, you know, and especially right after I got out, I thought, oh, maybe I should just go back. Maybe it would never be the same. The people would be different. You know, you're never going to recreate those experiences that you had. You just got to appreciate that they happened and appreciate them for what they were. But definitely the camaraderie.
How much do you still talk to the guys from your unit, even the wounded ones?
Well, unfortunately, the guys who had been wounded have had a really rough path, man. And some of them have pretty much completely disappeared from society. Some of them have become very hard to keep in touch with, although many of us have tried. Their mileage has varied quite differently than ours, and their experiences varied quite differently than ours. You know, being in a place like Walter Reed, you know, that has its own set of challenges when you're surrounded by nothing but horribly maimed men and women. I do stay in pretty regular contact with quite a few guys that I served with, and you know, I'm proud to say that many of the guys are still in. I served with some guys. I'll tell you what, I served with one guy. I promise you, he is going to be the next sergeant major of the Army. Really? I have no doubt about that. Oh yeah, the guy is just super squared away. His name is Brian Ray. He was on my truck, and he's one of those soldiers you knew from the beginning, this guy is destined like for great things. He's going to be someone big here in this. And so, yeah, a lot of the guys I talk to a lot of guys that are still in, I keep in pretty regular touch with them. I despise social media, but one of the great things that it's done is given us the ability to really stay in touch with each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's got its pluses and minuses, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where the guy who you think is going to be the sergeant major of the Army, what's he doing right now?
I believe he just took, and he's young, but I believe he just took his first company as a first sergeant. He was at West Point teaching cadets. He was a drill sergeant. He's done all kinds of stuff, and so yeah, you could tell. You know, you get around this guy, and you're like, this is one of the most squared away dudes I've ever met in my entire life.
And you know what the funny part is that I've met guys like that. I'm like, yeah, this guy's going to be a general, right? Like, you know,
yeah. Right.
And then you look at yourself and you go, that's just not me. Like,
no,
you know,
absolutely.
That's not me.
Absolutely. And you know what, though? That's okay. I mean, that's why I didn't stay in, because I was like, you know what, look, man, like I could never be what this guy's going to be. And that's okay, because maybe I'm just not meant to be, you know, and that's perfectly cool. You know, I'm completely cool accepting that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm still doing this 21 years later, and I never thought I'd last as long as I did. So
wow.
Sometimes the Army has a way of surprising.
Keeping you in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I joke around. It's the best marriage I ever had. And one of the things I've loved about the National Guard over the active duty is I get to date the Army. I don't have to marry it. Yeah. You know, like it's a comfortable sort of existence for me. I still get to serve, and I still get to be part of that camaraderie because I don't want to leave it. But in the same respect, I get to be a civilian. Although, you know, we talk about the identity a lot, and I keep this thought buried in the back of my mind. I don't think about it often, but, you know, literally over half my life has been in a uniform. I don't know an adult life without the military in it. And it is very scary for me to think of the day when I have to take the uniform off and I can't put it back on again.
Right. And what happens after that. And, you know, and I think that's a very real thing, man. I mean, it's not even just with the military, I think with a lot of professions, but I also think that, you know, that's a huge thing though. Like with, you know, I think that the military, every branch could do a better job preparing men and women for what happens when that kind of abrupt stop. Cause it's very abrupt. One day you are, and then literally the next day you are not.
Well,
and,
the only problem with that theory is you have to remember one thing. That at the end of the day, you and I, whether it's E4 or O4 or O5, E5, whatever it may be, we're a commodity, right? And we're a replaceable commodity. And the goal of the military is to keep its commodities ready to go to war. And once you're no longer part of that, they can't take their focus away from that. They should, because but we look at this from a standpoint of, is there any other organization, private sector or government sector, that follows you to your next job to make sure you're doing okay? None of them do, right? But there is a sense of civilian guilt, like we owe it to us, like to service members. We owe it to them to ensure their transition, right? And that's part of a way of saying thank you for your service. But in reality, you know, I don't know how tenable that function is. I wish there was a way to do it more, but it would require more resources than the military is willing to give.
And I guess I'm not.
You could just fix the VA, but that is a whole different discussion.
Well, yeah, that's a whole shit show. But I guess I'm not suggesting that, like, you know, there's some big program, but I think even maybe just putting that in people's minds would go a long way.
Well, prepping people for leaving isn't what the military does well, because their whole goal is to keep you.
Yeah, they want to keep you around so they can continue to abuse you indefinitely.
Property of U.S. government stamped right on your ass. That's what it is. So, and so you worked in IT. What else are you doing with yourself now?
Really, I outside of my job and my family, I do. I make some YouTube videos, as goofy as that sounds. I do like gun and gear reviews that kind of fill some of my time. I'm really big into like shooting sports. I'm really big into hunting. Hunting is actually one of the things that has helped me greatly in my post-Army life. Finding that as a hobby has been very fulfilling, and kind of being, I think, in touch with just this whole community, that also goes a long way. But I honestly try and live a pretty low key, normal life. As an IT guy, I often get from people, that I work with. I've had a lot of people that realize I was in the military, and they say, you were in the military? You were in the Army? And I was like, yeah, and I'm covered in tattoos. And so I normally have to wear long sleeve shirts. And so, yeah, like when people see me without the shirt on, they're like, that's our IT guy. Like, yeah, that's me.
Nice little surprise. Literally, it's something up your sleeve called tattoos. Yeah.
Right. Right. But yeah, I mean, that's really, man, I try and just be low key, peaceful. I am all about just living a nice, peaceful, honest life. And that's that.
Well, listen, Justin, I mean, it's an incredible story, man. I certainly appreciate you being so honest and talking about things that I know are tough for you. So I thank you for sharing your story, man. And I'm glad you got a chance to tell it. And I hope that there was some catharsis in it for you.
No, absolutely. And, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to tell a story. I mean, I have, I've seen the guest lists that you've had on some of your previous podcasts. And I'll be honest, I was a little intimidated, like, man, I don't deserve to stand on the same stage as some of these people, but I do appreciate you giving me that outlet. It was a good feeling to be able to tell some of that. So I do appreciate that.
No, listen, man. And I tell you, it's interesting. I have found some of the more candid and honest discussions are from E4s and guys like you, who don't have these grand jobs and don't have these, high level positions in the military, that just give you a whole lot of honesty and a whole lot of ground level stuff. And I think that's equally important. I mean, again, it's
right. Absolutely.
There's a whole lot we can learn from colonels and generals, and a whole lot we can learn from sergeant majors. But at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road is guys like you. And it's that level of our organization that needs to continue to be strong. And the fact that you have a story to tell, I think, is more valuable than you're giving it credit for.
Oh, right on, man. Well, I appreciate that.
All right, Justin. Well, listen, man, you stay well. Thanks for your time as always, brother, and certainly thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks a lot, man. You take care.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.